To whom it may concern. I was referred to your firm by Myron Breslow, who expressed regret that they lacked the resources to handle the complications of my appeal. Theirs is the third such referral in a sequence of rejections, and I'm beginning to suspect each firm's apparent aversion to my case has more to do with maintaining their reputation than with the merits of my appeal. I understand that, due to considerably unfavorable press, my case is a highly unpopular one. But at this point, I'm running out of options. So, I beg of you to please read this through and try to comprehend my situation before declining out of fear of what might be said of you in the media. I understand that your time is short, so without delaying any further, I'll just tell you my story. 2.5 years ago, after circumstances had been made abundantly clear that my prospects as an aspiring actor were dismal, I began applying as a contestant to various reality TV shows. Part of me hoped that putting my name and face out there would get me the sort of exposure that might lead to more consistent and meaningful acting work, but most of me just needed the money, and I had neither the capacity nor the wherewithal for anything outside of entertainment. On April 15th, after months of applications and rejections, I received a letter notifying me that I had been accepted as a contestant on a Survivor-style competitive reality TV show. All contestants would be paid $40,000 for participating, and an additional $10,000 for every week they managed to remain in the game. The winner would receive $20 million. I didn't expect to win, of course. From the get-go, I understood that with 100 contestants in the mix, my odds of winning were pretty low. But the pay for mere participation seemed fair, and the opportunity for dramatic moments certainly didn't hurt either. So I called immediately to confirm my availability. A month later, after a few days of very basic wilderness survival training, I was flown out to the lush private island which was to serve as my new set. The first few days were mostly spent meeting the producers, crew, and other contestants, as well as signing legal documents granting the show rights to our names and likenesses, and relieving the production company and other contestants of any legal liabilities in the event of significant personal injury or death. All pretty standard. The next few days were dedicated to learning the rules and basic format. We were to be split into 10 teams consisting of 10 people each, and each week the teams would compete in a new challenge. The last to complete an objective by week's end would be eliminated and flown back home. In addition, at the end of each week, contestants would vote to eliminate one of their own members, whomever they felt weren't doing enough to increase the team's chances of winning. As far as my expectations for competitive reality TV went, most of this seemed pretty ordinary. The only strange things to stand out were what were dubbed the no parents and no hand-holding rules. The no parents rule meant that once the show started, there would be no cast, producers, or hosts on the island. Aside from the food and supplies which would be dropped off at regular intervals via helicopter, and the few paramedics stationed outside the island's perimeter in case of an emergency, teams were essentially on their own. Filming would be done remotely through camera and microphone-equipped drones. The no hand-holding rule was of a similar flavor. Essentially, it held that instructions would be communicated to each team only once at the start of every challenge, usually through dedicated drones equipped with speakers. Beyond that, it would be complete radio silence until a challenge was completed. It was left entirely up to us to resolve ambiguities in the instructions or deal with any unexpected developments. There was no way to ask for clarification. If the equipment jammed so as to make an obstacle course insurmountable, you couldn't just call it in and wait for repairs. It would be up to your team to find a way to surmount it anyway. If a challenge was so broken that multiple groups failed to complete it, there were no guarantees that a redo would be granted. We would simply have to wait until the end of the week to find out if the producers decided to show us any leniency or to simply eliminate both teams. It was also made clear to us that the producers were very partial to choosing the latter. For this reason, we were strongly encouraged to try our hardest to complete even the most broken challenges. The games were pretty innocuous at first: treasure hunt, capture the flag, but as the weeks wore on, they developed increasingly sinister nuances, testing not only our physical endurance, but our psychological wherewithal as well. One week we were told supply drops would be cut in half until the next challenge, which we were informed would require at least one teammate to have significant physical strength and endurance. We were essentially forced to decide amongst ourselves how to ration our food so as to maximize our odds of winning. Would we give most of it to a single champion in the hopes he carried the team at the cost of lowering our own individual odds? And if so, how would we decide who that champion would be? Would we simply take our chances of losing as a whole by dividing food equally? I opted for none of the above, and just stole our group a bunch of food from a competing team instead. Another week, we were told that one of the losing team's members would be adopted by whichever group was in the lead. We could thereby not only be saved from elimination, but be guaranteed a spot on a team with better odds, and immunity from elimination the following week, presumably as a way to give us a chance to earn our new team's trust. I imagine the producers wanted to test our loyalty. Would contestants turn traitor and strike a deal, or would they risk a loss in a grand show of solidarity? I chose to strike a deal. Somehow, week after week, mind game after mind game, I managed to stay in the running until the penultimate challenge, when the competition had come down to just me and one partner against another team of 2. To my amazement, it looked like I might actually win the 20 million. In earnest, I was at that point expecting some sort of reprieve or celebration for having made it so far. But less than a day later, instructions for our second-to-last game were delivered unceremoniously by a speaker drone.
Congratulations, lucky finalists! Throughout the last 8 weeks, you've proven your worth. When the rules worked against you, you bent them to your advantage. When the going got tough, you got tougher. By strength, stamina, perseverance, cooperation, betrayal, and maybe even a little luck, you've come out ahead. You're almost at the finish line. This next challenge is called the Most Dangerous Game. Your next supply drop will include 30 feet of rope, 2 top-of-the-line dart guns, and 10 tranquilizer darts. Your goal is simple. Hunt down and tranquilize a member of the opposing team. Once you do, you'll be given a map guiding you to one of 3 secret locations to bring your opponent before they wake up. You are not allowed to shoot your opponent with more than 1 dart, so you'll have to move quickly. First team to bring an opponent to the secret location will be the winner of this challenge. Good luck!
My one remaining partner was, to put it kindly, not exactly the brightest bulb on the tree. I'd specifically voted to eliminate the other one for precisely that reason. I figured when the game came down to 2 people, there would be no reasonable tie-breaking mechanism, and so the last challenge would likely require competing against our own partner somehow. I felt my chances of beating a dumb teammate were better than my chances of beating a smart one, so I voted against the smarter one. My partner voted against me by what I assumed to be a similar line of reasoning, and so the tiebreaker fell to the dumb one, who happened to vote in my favor. The rules of this game, as they were stated, didn't explicitly hold that we would be competing against our partners. They didn't specifically state that a contestant should try to be the first from their team to catch a member of the opposite, but it seemed pretty likely that this would be the determining factor. And so, as soon as we got our darts, I shot my teammate with one and tied him up in a small, out-of-the-way cave. Of course, I left one of his hands free and some food and water within reach so he wouldn't die. I'm not a monster, I just wanted to win. I reasoned that even if I happened to be wrong about the tiebreaker, it would be worse for both of us if his stupidity got him shot before I managed to carry us to victory. And truthfully, his was the sort of stupidity liable to result in precisely that outcome. With that one out of the way, I trekked out to a random point halfway between the perimeter and the center of the island to set up camp. I figured the 3 secret locations would have to equally partition the island's property, so as to be within reach regardless of where a contestant happened to be tranquilized. Since the island was vaguely circular in shape, a point halfway in would ensure I was as likely as I could be to 2 of the secret locations. Unfortunately, the drones seemed to be patrolling on a fixed loop the whole time, offering no means for the sounds of their whirring to lead me to whomever they were filming. So after setting up camp, I spent the next 2 days walking about a mile or so from the site in a number of directions, and then walking back in, leaving wrappers for my rations or footprints here and there. The general plan was to lure an opponent to a spot where I could easily shoot them from a tree. It took about a day of waiting before an opponent took the bait, and I shot her without much ado. As soon as I climbed down from the tree, I was greeted by a speaker drone carrying a map.
Congratulations, contestant! You've conquered the most dangerous game. We hope you still have some rope left, 'cause you'll be needing it. Please discard any spare tranquilizer darts you have in your possession. Tie up your prey and bring her to any of the locations marked on the map provided. Remember, you have to get there before your prey wakes up. The clock is ticking.
The closest location according to the map was a cave less than an hour's trek from my makeshift campsite. I had apparently chosen well. The cave was barren, save for a large metal cross roughly 7 feet in length laying on a metal table, with a few knives and forks beside it. To the side of the table was affixed a digital readout displaying 6.66 kilograms. The cross was engraved with fancy lettering which read, "A patent for your Eucharist." Just below that, in parentheses and a more conventional font, were the words, "Tie your prey here." The 3 camera drones that followed me into the cave flitted about trying to get the best angles as I tied down my prey. Once I was done, a speaker drone made its way to me and delivered further instructions.
Excellent work, contestant. It looks like intelligence is the name of your game. And your impeccable ability to account for every contingency appears to have paid off handsomely, in every way but one. It looks like your clever plan to get your partner out of the way has backfired. His screams for help were heard by the remaining opponent, and he was captured as of just 10 minutes ago. Looks like the race to complete the final challenge is already on. If you'll remember, when you first landed on this tropical paradise, you and your fellow contestants signed a waiver freeing the show and all other players of any legal liability in the event of personal injury. And boy, are the producers glad that you did, because this final challenge wouldn't be possible without your cooperation. If you'll take a look at the table, you'll notice a digital display showing 63 kilograms. That table is the scale. Your challenge will begin the instant your opponent wakes up. You must eat 2 pounds of her flesh. That's 0.907 kilograms, without letting her die, and without rendering her unconscious. If at any point your opponent loses consciousness due to shock or blood loss, you must stop what you are doing and force her back into consciousness by injecting her with one of the epinephrine doses located in the box beneath the table. You can only eat or slice and dice while your opponent is conscious, and will know if you're cheating. Blood weight doesn't count. You'll want to hurry though, because your opponent's objective will begin the instant your partner wakes up. The first of you to eat 2 pounds wins $20 million. Eat fast enough, and you might win before your opponent even has a chance to start.
With that, the speakers clicked back to apparent radio silence, and the camera drone slowed to a stop, hovering ominously, not moving an inch. Likely, you think the media coverage since has given you some idea as to what happened next. You'll have likely heard that I showed no sign of hesitation, that I was so overcome by greed or bloodlust I didn't even wait for my opponent to wake up, that as soon as the instructions were given, I coolly made my way to the box of epinephrine and wasted no time by forcing her awake with an injection. These sensationalist reports were in fact just that, sensationalism. While it is true that I opted to forcibly wake my opponent, I assure you I am neither a monster nor a cannibal. I did what I did only after giving the situation much due deliberation. Consider the circumstance in which I found myself. I had tied down my own partner to a rock and left him there completely defenseless for days. It was because of me that he had been caught. It was because of me that he was due to suffer the same fate as my unfortunate opponent. What could be done to spare him from the tragedy, but let it fall on someone else? To be clear, I'm not claiming that the money played no role in my decision. Obviously it did. I'm only human after all, and 20 million can buy an awful lot. Certainly, it would be more than enough money to atone for the evil I was about to commit. With just a 20th of that, I could do a number of things to save hundreds of lives. For example, I could buy vaccines for children in war-torn countries, or donate water filters and mosquito nets to remote African villages. With just a small fraction of that money, I could save hundreds of lives and still be rich. And what's 2 pounds of flesh compared to the lives of hundreds? These were the sorts of things I thought of, and I thought of them for many minutes. But then I thought that the longer I spent thinking, the higher my chances of my teammates suffering, and the lower my chances of having any money to do anything at all with. So yes, I took out the epinephrine and forcibly woke my opponent. But the footage of me thinking didn't go viral. All that went viral was the footage of my actions thereafter. Likely, you have watched the video yourself and have deemed me a ghoulish sight. Or if you were unable to stomach the spectacle, which I wouldn't blame you for, then you've almost certainly read descriptions. You've heard that the entire time, I apparently showed no emotion. That I went about the task as indifferently as someone folding laundry. That I said nothing when my opponent asked me what was going on or why she'd been tied down. That when she asked me why I was holding a knife, I only looked at her briefly before setting back to the task at hand. That I barely even blinked as I slowly sunk the blade into her thigh, or didn't so much as flinch when she began screaming and shrieking in agony. You might have even seen that I had been completely unmoved by her begging and pleading, or that the only words I spoke to her were, "Damn it, stop fidgeting, you'll ruin everything." You'll have heard that as I chewed and swallowed her flesh raw amidst the echoes of her crying, the only emotion I showed was boredom. That the only moment of awareness I did show was when I accidentally cut into an artery and rushed for more rope to tie a makeshift tourniquet around her leg. You'll have heard that any misconceptions by the average viewer that this was an act of compassion were immediately dispelled when, upon finishing the tourniquet, I injected my opponent with another dose of epinephrine to compensate for the blood loss and continued slicing and eating. I understand that from what's been in the media, I seem to have paid more attention to the scale than I did to the agonized crying and pleading of my opponent. I still, to this day, haven't been able to get the taste of raw flesh out of my mouth. I myself have viewed the footage many times over, and, in truth, even I am disturbed by how uncaring I appear. But I assure you my outward appearance in the video is not indicative of how I felt at the time. What the tape shows is not a lack of emotion, but in fact my attempts to deal with an overabundance of them. I had by then already resolved that the task must be completed. I avoided looking at my opponent not because I was disinterested, but because I couldn't bear to. When my opponent asked why she was tied down and why I was holding a knife, I said nothing because there was nothing I could say. What words could possibly alleviate the horror of the atrocity I was about to commit? When she began screaming in agony, it took every last bit of strength in me to keep a steady hand so as not to hurt her any more than I had to. When I said the words, "You'll ruin everything," I was not simply being crass. I really did mean everything. She had already lost half a pound of flesh. The more she fidgeted, the more she increased the odds that it would all be for nothing, that I might accidentally cause her to bleed out and my partner to befall the same fate. All of it would have been because of me, and the loss of this challenge and a chance of winning 20 million would have left me with nothing to atone for my actions. That fidgeting, in fact, was precisely what caused me to accidentally cut into an artery, and of course I immediately rushed to fashion a tourniquet. Money or not, obviously I didn't want her to die. Injecting her with epinephrine again, and continuing to eat after finishing the tourniquet, contrary to how it might appear, was not by lack of compassion. Just the opposite, in fact. It was due to compassion that I continued. As awful as it may have been to make someone suffer, it would have been nowhere near as awful as having done it for nothing. But in the end, nothing was precisely what I had done it for. Just a minute after resuming the most traumatic meal of my life, the camera drones began twitching slightly, and the speaker drone began broadcasting static and interrupted speech. After a few seconds, it cleared up enough that I could discern full sentences, and the broken sounds of the producers pleading for me to stop. As it turned out, the stillness of the drone's ominous hovering wasn't by way of any intentional decision to set the mood. Apparently, a storm back at the station had cut satellite transmission at precisely the most inopportune moment. The original intent behind the final challenge, I would later find out, was simply to see if I would choose to do something so horrific to an opponent for $20 million. Ostensibly, I would have only won if I refused. A dishonest test to see if the finalists valued kindness over money. If it looked like I would have gone through with the challenge, the producers would have immediately intervened and told me the game was over and that I had lost. Instead, a thunderstorm left them unable to transmit any data at all, receiving only the occasional low-quality video frame. They were left watching in horror as I diligently carried out the last of a twisted task that they had the gall to set me upon in the first place, unable all the while to stop me from reifying their own twisted machinations. From what I remember of their testimony, it took them another half hour to establish contact with the paramedics stationed along the island's perimeter. And it took the paramedics another hour to make their way to my cave. My opponent died of blood loss 10 minutes before they arrived. For the producers' gross negligence, the studio was required only to pay a fine, while I, on the other hand, lacking an army of lawyers that a major studio has at their disposal, am left to rot in a prison merely for following the directions I was given and for attempting to protect my partner from the same sick fate that befell my opponent, and without so much as a penny to show for it. I understand that, as a business, you have more interest in your bottom line than in my freedom, and that there is little opportunity for either of us to profit by asserting my innocence or reducing my sentence. So it is this, the matter of my $20 million, with which I seek your assistance. A few months after losing my criminal case, I filed a civil suit against the studio for breach of contract. The contract, which I have attached to this letter, states that a contestant wins by completing the challenges as instructed. It does not, under any reasonable interpretation, state that contestants win by refusing to complete challenges, nor that they lose by completing them. Last week, the civil court ruled against me. I believe this was in significant part due to the jury having been biased by the sensationalist media coverage of my situation. I ask you then to consider taking up my case on contingency. I am willing to pay you half of anything I win. If it's possible, and you think it would help make it more worth your time, I am more than open to adding additional claims to the suit. I think intentional infliction of emotional distress sounds like a good fit, and I'm sure that my acting experience could help play it up for a jury. Thank you for your time. Please let me know if you are interested, or if you know of any other firms that might be. Best wishes, Jamie Campbell.
Congratulations, loyal viewer! You've made it to the end of the video. Please note that applications will be closed until next season. In the meantime, if you're anxious for more bold, award-winning programming, be sure to click the bell icon and we'll let you know the instant it gets past our legal team. As always, please remember to like or subscribe. Thank you for your cooperation.